is the exact process that we use to take the data from metabolism testing, body composition testing, and then use that data to create an effective fat loss plan. So the big thing we do here is really use metabolic testing to craft a plan which is personalised to you. And when we say it really is personalised to you, it really is. And the way that we do that is we're looking to get data from body composition testing, from indirect calorimetry or metabolism testing, and then from that we've got a good idea about what we need to be doing for your goals. But more importantly, we can sit down, we can have a chat, and we can really understand the person so we know exactly what they need to be doing. So first up, we do the InBody test, and for those who have done or not done an InBody test, this is a simple body composition test, a slightly better model, not quite a DEXA scan. But this just really gives a good understanding of where you are in terms of muscle mass, fat mass, and visceral fat, and fat-free mass. And we use these, say, metrics to understand where you need to improve and also to help understand your macro targets. So this is actually my one, my reverse transformation, which I'll highlight in a moment. Whereas when I started, I was around 86 kilos, now I'm around 91. When I started, I was 11% body fat, and now I'm 15% body fat. So the goal of the next kind of 8 to 12 weeks is that I need to bring those calories down. Well, I need to lose a bit of body fat whilst trying to retain some sort of muscle mass. When we look at visceral fat as well, for this, we're looking for below 10, ideally. Mine's 5 at the moment, it has been 3. And for most normal people, we try and keep it below 10, whereas for athletes, we try and keep it 5 and below. And this is a really good marker because once we understand this, we can kind of craft a plan. Well, let's rewind a second. Once we understand your visceral fat and it's say above 10, we know what type of strategies can be quite effective for getting rid of it. So for example, we know that high intensity interval training is particularly good for visceral fat. And we also know there's a dose response with exercise, meaning that the more exercise you do, the more it brings down visceral fats. And this can be quite pertinent for menopausal women who naturally have higher visceral fat. So we can say, right, we need to do more exercise. Obviously, there's always going to be caveats to this, and that's where it's important to have that understanding of a coach, whereas someone who's not doing much exercise could be in a highly stressful job, a little bit more stress going through menopause as well. Loads of high-intensity exercise might not be good. However, doing more walking, more low-intensity exercise could be a good addition to the program if it does fit in to their lifestyle. So that's really the reason why we do the visceral fat. We also use this to calculate your protein targets, and the way that I like to do it is using fat-free mass. So unlike typical coaches online where they'll do, say, your body weight times by 2 or by 1.6, I actually like to use fat-free mass and then multiply that by 2 for an average person or someone who's looking to build muscle or has low muscle mass, which you multiply that 2.5. And the reason for this really is if the individual is very lean, we could use that, but people who are overweight and carrying too much fat mass, that fat mass just simply doesn't require the protein compared to your fat-free mass, so muscles, bones, etc. So that's the reason why we use that way. So once we've got this, we know which direction we need to go. We know I either need to lose weight, we need to build muscle, we know that if you need to increase your visceral fat, then we've got your protein. What we then need to look at is your RMR test, and with the RMR test, the idea with this is just to get this baseline. Now, the difference between a basal metabolic rate and a resting metabolic rate is that they're typically measured in the same way, so through indirect calorimetry. So the way this works is that you sit down, you breathe into the device, and it's measuring the oxygen you're using and then the carbon dioxide that you're breathing out. So once we can understand how much oxygen you're using, because we know how many calories it takes to use a certain amount of oxygen, we then know how many calories you're burning for that period of time. And then we multiply that over the 24 hours, we've got your resting metabolic rate or your calorie burn for the day. The difference between the two is imagine that BMR or basal metabolic rate really is that absolute minimum amount of calories that you're burning at rest. So imagine comatose. Whereas resting metabolic rate is a little bit more of a fluid term. And this could be, say, just a general day-to-day kind of movement, really kind of sat still or lying still. The way that I like to do it here, this is just my personal way of doing it, I've done about 1,000 of these now, is that I find if I just get people to sit there doing nothing, that just gives it almost like a maintenance calories, which at rest. So for example, mine is around that 2,400. I know that I'm burning around 2,400 calories at rest, sat there doing nothing. If I eat this, I'll probably maintain. So once you've got the metabolism, once we've got the InBody score, it's then a case of taking that data and creating that plan. So I'm just going to show you on here now the way that I would do it. Again, so let's just use myself as an example. So the way that I would do it is I've got this little crib sheet that I've developed where saying that, my wife actually did it for me because she's the mathematician, is that I'd put the calories in here that we'd use from the metabolism test, and then we'd use this data for the protein. So if my RMR is 2,400, if I wasn't very active, or if it wasn't an athlete, I would typically take off around 400 to 500 calories off this. And the reason why we're looking for that 500 calories is because it's 1 pound of fat per week. So we can never be too mathematical, but 500 times 7 days is going to be 3,500 calories, and we know that is roughly 1 pound of fat. So we can't be too, we're not robots, we're not machines, sorry, it's not. There's always going to be some flex in that, it's never going to be perfect, but it's a very good framework to get us started. So if we can try and create that 500 calorie deficit per day, we know we're going to be in business when it comes to weight loss. So for me, being at 2,400, if I wasn't active, I would bring this down to about 1,900, 2,000, and that would be my starting point. However, I am active. So for people like myself, I would actually use activity to create that deficit. But rather than just trying to work out everything I do, which can be quite challenging, I much prefer to say, right, let's go off RMR, see how we get on with this. If we're going to say double up in terms of training, that's when we could say look to increase the calories in those specific days. So looking at this cheat sheet, the way that I would do it, so I know my RMR is 2,400, so I put 2,400 into my kind of base calories. My target body weight, I want to get back down to that, say, 85, 86 kilos. And then I need to work out my fat-free mass. Sorry, so my fat-free mass is 77. My calculator is currently filming me, so I'll just do it on here. So 77 times 2.5. So a top end would be 192. Whereas kind of the bottom end would be about 150. So between 150 and 190. Nowadays, I don't have as much protein. I don't actively have whey protein, just a personal preference. There's nothing wrong with it. We're probably looking at somewhere in the middle. So so I'll just change this to around 170 is probably about right. So about 170 grams of protein, and then my carbohydrates and fat totals don't matter that much if fat loss is the goal. If it's performance, we need to start leaning more into carbohydrates, and then we also need to start thinking of preferences. So again, some people might prefer to go low carb, some people might prefer to go low fat. Again, if you have gallbladder issues, we're going to have to go low fat. If you want to go keto, we're going to naturally go higher fat. The point is though, provided we stay within the calories, provided we're hitting the protein targets, the carb and fat ratio will just be inversely proportionate of one another. So if the fat goes up, the carbs will have to come down. If the carbs goes up, the fat will have to come down. I know, again, this is from working with hundreds of people, that kind of 3 grams per kilo of carbohydrates is a starting point. So if you ever work with, say, we work with boxers, we do like a 3-to-1 ratio. So 3 grams per kilo of carbohydrates, 1 gram per kilo of fat, 2 grams per kilo of protein, and that can give you a really good starting point. So we're going to start with 3 gram per kilo of carbohydrates, about 250 grams of carbs, and about 78 grams of fat, which is about, again, that 1 gram per kilo. The reason why we use grams per kilo rather than percentages is that if you looked at percentages and you were changing your calories day to day, which is normal, 40% of, say, 2,400 is going to be different to, say, 40% of 2,800. Whereas we're only going to need the same amount of protein, or maybe carbohydrates might come up, but it starts kind of like squiffing the numbers of what we actually need based on your data. So we've got this starting point. My calories are 2,400, my protein's 170, and my carbs are 250. What we then do is, again, using this crib sheet, we're able to kind of look at your targets in terms of fiber, water, fruit, veg, and also protein per main meal. And you've also got some typical kind of amounts for omega-3s and some supplements too. What we then do, we have a sheet where we look at your breakdown. And this is where I like to talk to my client, and I start asking them, how often are you eating? When do you like to eat? Do we need to say front load or back load some of your food? And once we've got that, we can actually kind of have a good little breakdown like these here, where we know how much protein, carbs, and fat we need per main meal. Now, you don't have to follow this exactly. This isn't about being very, not arbitrary, very very binary, sorry, where you have to have 43 grams per main meal. It just gives you an idea about how to structure those meals. And this is kind of the key point. So let's say, for example, I need 2-4, I'm going to have 3 main meals per day and 2 snacks. I'm going to need about 40 grams of protein, 15 grams of fat, and about 60 to 70 grams of carbohydrates per day. What I'm able then to do is put together your report. So again, this is just a bit of a guide for you. Again, you would have something like this if you did an RMR test with me. We take those numbers and then we can create the base calories or the structure. And then what I'll able to do as well is, depending on how many carbohydrates, fats, or say protein you need per main meal, I can give you a bit of a crib sheet to show you this is how we hit that 40 grams, this is how we hit the 50 grams of carbs. So it becomes very easy for you to put that together. And then finally, you've got that generic type recommendations at the bottom in terms of supplements, and I'll just highlight to you though which ones are more pertinent to you. So for example, me at the moment, mine's going to be creatine monohydrate to maintain and keep muscle. And what other nutrients do I need to think about in the actual diet rather than supplementing? So it could be, say, things like omega-3. Vitamin D maybe in the winter months, at the moment it's not going to matter so much. So then you've got this real good understanding of exactly what we need to do to crack on with that. So there we have it. I've got my RMR, I've got my InBody sheet, I've got my plan, now I need to execute. If you choose to do one of the programs with us as well, I do like to, obviously we can put meal plans together for you. And what I just do is take those macros and I build those meals. Okay, so it's nice and simple, and it also fits in with what you would like to do. So if you're interested in metabolism testing, so resting metabolic rate testing, even just InBody testing, coaching, VO2 max testing, or how we can take all that data and craft a plan for you and your body, then get in touch. Head over to metabolicbirmingham.co.uk or boxnutrition.co.uk. Book in a discovery call. We can have a chat to see how I can help. So until next time, stay healthy.